We rolled dice in this game. So the reason that you keep losing is probably just the luck of the dice. No, maybe not. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another Glacial Geek video. I am Phil, the Glacial Geek, and today I want to talk to you about why you're losing your games of Warhammer 40K, or well, more specifically, Warhammer 40K. That's kind of what I'm going to talk about. These lessons can also be attributed to other games that you play, and it just kind of comes down to a couple things that I think people lose sight of when they are doing everything from list building to actually playing the game and what they're trying to accomplish. And at the end of the day, they lose the game and they blame either their opponent for bringing a meta list, or they blame the dice for not giving them what they needed. And at the end of the day, those are very often not the reasons that you lose a game. They maybe can contribute to why you might lose a game, but they are very rarely the pure reason why you lose a game. So let's kind of go through some of the things that you might be doing that are losing you games and you don't even realize. So number one is going to be list building. Now, a lot of times when we build lists, when you're talking about building lists for a competitive scene versus just like a fun, fluffy game, people think that those are completely separate from each other and that they have nothing to do with each other. But the fact is that what happens in a competitive list versus kind of a fluffy list that will do well on the table and provide like a close, fun game between you and your friends, the differences are very minimal. You know, you might not spam as many units as you might in a competitive list that does things really, really well. You might not take certain units because they're just not going to be fun to play against. There's just no interaction between you and your opponent. But other than that, you still have to keep some of the same concepts in mind when you're making a list for a tournament, as you would just making a list to play with your friend down in the basement, so that the two of you can have fun over the course of your evening. The first thing to keep in mind is that you need to have synergy. So if you have a list that doesn't work well together, that doesn't help each other, that doesn't doesn't help each other, your different units compete and get their objectives, it's going to be a walkover. Like, your opponent is going to do so much against you that you're not going to be able to stand up against them. And it doesn't matter if you're looking to win first place at a tournament, or if you're looking to have a fun game with your friends. If your friend is just bringing a fluffy list, but you don't have a list that can do what it needs to, he's going to roll over you. And that's going to leave you feeling, both of you feeling like, well, what was the point of this? You know, you might have fun with your friend, and I've lost games really hard and had a good time, but I've also enjoyed games that are really close, win, lose, or draw. Those are way more fun to be a part of. And if you're looking to enhance your enjoyment, either in tournaments or at in your basement with your friend, you want to enhance that enjoyment. And the enjoyment is certainly enhanced when you have a close, fun, hard-fought game. So you need to have synergy. So you need to have units that can go out and shoot. You need to have units that can go out and engage with the enemy. You have to have units that can hold objectives. You need to have units that can do secondaries. If you don't have those, you're not going to win the game. So if you just go out there and you're like, I've got the most killy list possible, if your opponent is able to just jump on objectives, if your opponent's able to do the secondaries, they're going to win points and they're going to win the game. And you're going to be left there going like, I don't know what happened. I had this list that was super killy. It had all these really fun, these units that were just going to punch him in the face, but I wasn't able to do the actions. I wasn't able to jump on objectives. I wasn't able to stay on objectives, and I wasn't able to do what I needed to win the game. Because at the end of the day, the game is about scoring points and winning with those, and not just about killing your opponent. So if you are relying entirely on just killing your opponent, very often you're going to lose the game. Even if you're able to do it, you have to do it so quickly that you have enough time to just get points after they're dead, that it's very often you're not going to be able to catch up to whatever lead that they're going to build if you're not able to do the game. So you need to make a list that has units that can do secondaries. You need to have a list that has units that can punch and can do damage to your opponent, because if you're not doing any damage, it becomes a lot more difficult to to play the objectives. If you're not able to kill your opponent off of objectives, you're not able to kill your opponent off of their objectives so that they can't score the points, because you need to keep them from scoring as much as you need to score yourself. So you need to have some killing. You have to have some units that can just go out there and do objectives for you, that are really good at doing those without sacrificing what you have. So if you have like a really strong unit, like for instance, with my Dark Angels units, if my Deathwing Knights are spending a turn just doing a secondary, doing an action on an objective, they're not doing what they're supposed to. In that list, they are supposed to go out there, punch my opponent, hold objectives, and just keep fighting. That's what they're there for. They're not there to do actions. I have jump pack intercessors that can just jump out there and they can jump on objectives. They can do secondaries. I've got Azrael with his assault intercessors that are able to go and do objectives. I've got units specifically in mind when I make my list that are out there to do my secondary so that I can score points to help me win. And then my Deathwing Knights are punching into my opponent, taking down his units that are trying to do secondaries. And then I have my Eradicators taking down his big units that are designed to kill my hard-hitting units, and all those things. I've got that synergy going on with my list because I know that that's how you win games. You win games by doing the whole thing. But they talk about all-comers lists. If you have an all-comers list, that means that you are keeping in mind synergy. So you have the ability to shoot things. You have the ability to punch things. You have the ability to do secondaries. You have the ability to hold objectives. That's how you win games, and that's how you do it consistently. And that's why you see the lists that are coming out of the tournament scene are tailored and tweaked and like highly honed to do those objectives and do those things very specifically with the least amount of points necessary for each of them, so you can have more options to do it. So when you talk about these meta lists, what the meta lists are looking at doing is finding those units that can do what you need them to in the game, and they're taking them to the nth degree. And you don't have to do that if you're playing your game in your basement. You don't have to have like an entire squad of Eradicators, huge squad of Eradicators with the Harmesis or the Apothecary Biologist with the Fire Discipline inside of a repulsor, going out there and just obliterating your opponent's army. If you don't want to, if that's going to make it a not fun game for you, then don't take that. But you should have a unit that can shoot your opponent that's trying to kill your other stuff. You don't have to take 3 squads of Deathwing Knights. You can take 1. You can take 2. You can do whatever you want to, but you should still have those concepts in mind when you're making your list so that it can be fun and you can still hang in the game, because you don't want to play a 3-hour game, 4-hour game, 5-hour game, depending upon how lackadaisical you're taking it, and at the end of it, just like not have any points because you weren't able to do what the game said. Or you don't want to set aside an entire evening of play to then lose in turn 1 and then just be sitting there and then the two of you just being like, oh, what do we do now? That's what you want to do. So you want to keep those concepts in mind, even if you're making a fluffy fun list and if you're making a tournament list. Both of those are going to come in, both of those situations are going to require you to think about that kind of synergy. The second thing you need to keep in mind and why you might be losing games is going to come down to focusing on your opponent versus focusing on the mission. So to win a game, you need to score points. That's how it goes. So if you are losing to your friend in your basement all the time and you just like aren't able to beat them, you've kind of tweaked your list so that it works well against his, but you're not winning. It's because you're probably focusing too much on your opponent and not on what you have to do to score. So there's some attention needs to be paid to your opponent. You need to try to keep them from scoring their objectives. You still need to have that interaction, the fighting into them, shooting into them, hiding from them, doing all those different things. But if you're not focusing on grabbing objectives to score your points, if you're not looking at scoring your secondaries to score your points, you're not going to win. And you need to have that like laser focus on what it is that you need to do to score points. So every time you draw those cards from that deck to see what your secondaries are, you need to keep in mind, what do I need to do to score these points so that I can continue scoring points and winning, or looking at the table, looking at the battleground and looking at these objectives and being like, which ones can I hold reasonably and which ones am I just not going to be able to hold, but what can I maybe fight my opponents to keep him from being able to hold? So if you look at the board, you look at what's going on, you look at how you score points, depending upon what the primary mission is, depending upon the board layout, the objective layout, what your secondaries you draw. If you focus on those, you are going to be more likely to win than if you don't. If you don't, you're going to be in a hard place to win. It's going to come down to luck. And at the end of the day, we don't want to rely on luck. That's why you see like the top players often finish top in a lot of the tournaments they go to, is because they're not just relying on dice rolls to win. They're relying on their tactics, they're relying on their list building, all these things that are under their control is why they finish in those top places. And it's also what, that's just the reality of it. If you focus on what you can do, regardless of what your opponent does, regardless of what the dice do, if you can focus on that, that is going to win you games. So your opponent might have this like big centerpiece unit that's just like doing a lot of damage, and you're like, oh man, I want to kill that thing so bad. But you draw a secondary that requires you to kill a bunch of different units. So, you need to kill a bunch of different units on objectives. Say that centerpiece isn't on an objective. You need to kill multiple units to score you points. If you just dump everything into that centerpiece unit, if you don't kill it, or if you only kill it and nothing else, you're going to be costing yourself points. Whereas if you took the turn to focus on some of his side units that he has going on there, and you focused on a couple small units that he had pushed up in invulnerable positions or that were easier to kill, you're suddenly now scoring more points. Your opponent's going to have less units to be able to do his objectives and his secondaries later, and you're setting yourself up for victory versus just losing focus, running in to try to kill his centerpiece unit and winning like maybe a moral victory. And if that's what you want, if you want a moral victory, you can choose that. But then understand that that's why you're not going to be winning the game. You're going to be winning that moral victory that you decided you wanted to do. So focus on the mission, focus on the game that you can control, and don't lose focus by focusing on what your opponent can do. That's a lot of focus, I know, but that's kind of what these games require, is a lot of focus to like pay attention to what's going on in there. The next thing you need to keep in mind is that your CP should be used to score you points. So if you're gonna spend CP on a secondary, or if you're on a stratagem, that stratagem should be aimed at scoring you points. So do you want to put on like Armor of Contempt onto your unit because you want them to survive and stay on an objective and score you points? Then yes, that's a proper use of those CP. But is that unit no longer going to be scoring you points? Maybe they're in a position that they maybe the objective that they were on is off the table. They're no longer going to be able to get onto the other objectives. They're kind of just out in the wind at that point. And sure, yeah, maybe they can come up and punch some things later, but their primary mission at that point is done. They've scored you the points that they could in this game. If you spend your CP trying to protect them and keep them alive, at that point, you're using your CP ineffectively, and you're not helping yourself in the game to go forward and win. So I have Azrael on my list. He gives me the 2 CP, and very often when I'm drawing my secondaries, I'm spending that CP to get rid of any secondaries that are going to require me to use that are going to be either hard for me to achieve or impossible for me to achieve, and anything that's going to make me use my units in ways that I don't want them used. So if the only way that I'm going to score a secondary is if I use one of my Deathwing Knight units to do an action, but they're in a place where they can just push forward, gain me more board control, and help me further the mission forward, then I'm going to spend the CP and get rid of that secondary and cycle through in the deck. Because the more you're cycling through in the deck, the more likely you are to pull the secondaries that you're good at, the secondaries that your army flows into better. And yeah, I don't have that CP anymore to put on Armor of Contempt later on. I don't have that CP anymore to just do like Overwatch, not unnecessarily on a unit my opponent moves in that's not going to be scoring him points. I don't have that CP, but that CP was then used to help me win the game. It's helped me score points because now I've got a secondary that hopefully I can do better. And sure, if you draw another one that's bad, c'est la vie. That's how it works. Luck of the draw there. But you're at least attempting to spend the CP to win you the game. You're spending the CP to score you points because you're trying to get a better secondary to get more points to try to win it for you. And that's important. And honestly, I'm as guilty as the next of spending CP, flipping being like, oh, I wish I could have gotten that shot, so I'm going to spend a CP to re-roll that shot. Or I wish I could have made that charge, I'm going to spend a CP to re-roll it. Yeah, sometimes it's fun. Sometimes if I'm in a position where I'm not really like I don't have anything that I'm going for. Sure, you can spend it and do it. There's nothing wrong with that. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it's great. Sometimes you re-roll that 10-inch charge and you succeed and it feels really good. You get them onto position and maybe that does help you in the future there. But the less you are doing it on those kind of like emotional uses of CP and the more you're using it on a tactically driven scoring you points way, the better able you're going to be, because CP is a limited resource that you have to help further your ability to score points. And if you can do it properly, you're going to be more likely to win. The fourth thing that might be holding you back is not knowing your rules. You know, you could say, oh, I didn't know what my opponent was doing. And sure, there's a lot of armies out there and you don't necessarily have to know every single thing you can do. But you should know what your army does so that you can know what to do in any kind of situation to help further your game along. So if you are forgetting to use your Oath of Moment on your Space Marines, you're putting yourself at a disadvantage to try to score and win the game. If you are forgetting that your unit actually has sticky objectives and you've been sitting them on that objective and you're holding it because you want to hold that objective, but you forgot that they have sticky, you could have put it on there and moved them onto another objective and gotten sticky, then you're putting yourself at a disadvantage. If you are forgetting that your gun actually gets rerolls against monsters and vehicles because you just didn't realize it, you didn't know it, you're putting yourself at a disadvantage. So suddenly now you have the list that could do all you need it to do, but you're not using them properly. You're not using them in the way that they're going to be able to do what you need them to do. And you are putting yourself in a position where it's going to be harder to win than it could have been. And that might be the difference. Maybe you're losing close games and like a few points might be the difference between remembering that you could reroll to shoot that monster holding the center objective or not. Or maybe it's like the difference between holding 2 objectives versus holding 1 objective. And that could have been the difference remembering that your unit had sticky objectives and could have run off onto another objective. Or run off and done an action away from the objective. Any of those things are possible if you don't remember your rules and you don't know them. So yes, you may not know all of your opponent's rules, but you can also, if you know your own rules, which you should do because you have the rule book that you're bringing with your army, you know, supposedly, know your rules, know what each unit does, know what your stratagems are that you have available to you, know what your enhancements do, know the synergies that you have going on there, and remember that you have certain leaders doing certain things for your units and certain units doing certain things for your leaders. If you can remember all of those, you're going to be in a better place to win, to get those extra points that you have available to you to make the difference between losing and winning. And along those same lines, number 5 is going to be talk to your opponent. Make sure that you understand what your opponent is doing with their army. So if he says, oh, I get rerolls, I get reroll 1s. You go, well, why do you have reroll 1s? And he goes, oh, it's because of the leader that's inside this unit. You're like, okay, cool, sounds great. Or you go, it's like, or if he goes, oh, I get to reroll wounds. And you go, why do you have reroll wounds? It's like, oh, the unit has a specific rule that allows me to do that. It's like, oh, great, that sounds awesome. If you just sit there and he goes, I'm rerolling 1s, and you don't ask why, your opponent may have forgotten his rules. May have thought, oh no, wait, oh man, I made a mistake. It's actually the leader that's in this other group. He's not in this group. I don't get to reroll 1s. My bad. Sorry. It's like, yeah, no problem. Or it's like, oh, they only get reroll 1s when they're on an objective. I'm not on an objective. I forgot. I made that mistake. It's like, great, sounds great. At that point, if you're talking to your opponent, make sure you understand what they're doing and have that conversation, because you shouldn't feel bad if your opponent asks you what's going on. You're not trying to catch them out. You're not trying to like, ooh, gotcha. You just want to make sure that you understand what's happening, and your opponent should ask you and be understanding of what's happening with your army, so that the two of you are now just in a tactical battle versus just a who remembered their rules better or who was able to like accidentally forget their rules, you know? Because there are times that you actually legitimately accidentally forget your rules and you do it the wrong way and you don't realize because your opponent didn't call you out on it, didn't ask you about it, didn't say anything about it. If you talk to your opponent and you have an ongoing conversation about the game that you're doing so that you understand everything they're doing, you understand everything that they can try to do, you don't have to know their rules beforehand. You don't have to know the rules of every army out there. You just need to be willing and able to communicate with your opponent about what they're doing. And if they have a problem explaining to you what they're doing, if they have a problem with you asking about that, then they're the problem, not you asking about it, because you absolutely should be asking them about what's going on. And if you're not doing that, if you're not having that conversation, you're putting yourself in a position where you might be losing out on points because your opponent's doing things wrong, or your opponent is doing things that you just don't understand. You're not able to react to it properly. Because once you know that that unit rerolls ones, then suddenly now maybe you don't want to engage them in a certain way because you're like, they've got a lot of attacks, rerolling ones is going to be putting me in a disadvantageous position. But if you ask them, you talk to them, and you have that communication, you're going to be in a position where you're going to be able to react, you're going to be able to do, and you're going to be able to play the game properly and have that tactics that you wouldn't normally have. So communication is key, and it should be back and forth. You should be just as willing to explain to your opponent what you're doing, because you don't want to win by being sneaky and underhanded. You want to win by being the best tactician at the table at the time. And that's what it comes down to, is that you don't want to win because your opponent didn't talk to you, and you don't want to win because you refused to talk to your opponent. You want to win because you were the better player. And that's what it comes down to. So if you are not having that conversation back and forth, which is more of an issue in tournaments if you're playing than in your basement, because presumably anyone that you've invited into your basement is going to be a friend of yours and you're going to have that conversation. But you have to have that conversation. You have to look there and ask to see how the rule is. See how it's stated. And you go, oh, well, actually it says it's only on objectives. Maybe your opponent's like, oh, I didn't realize that. My bad. So you can look at that, look at the cards that he has, look at the rules that they have there, and have that conversation back and forth and just talk about it. Because at the end of the game, at the end of the day, there's nothing about this game that should be top secret information. Nothing that you're going to be hiding other than your battle plan. Because you don't have to tell them what your battle plan is, but you should tell them what your rules are, because that's just the reality of playing a game on a fair battlefield, on a fair playing field. And number 6 might just be luck. You know, there's a reason that the top players don't win every single game that they play, even if they have better tactics, they have better list building, they have better understanding of how the game's going. Still, at the end of the day, you might just have bad draws on your secondaries, you might just have bad dice. It happens, but that's going to be if you are losing the odd game here. You might lose the odd game here or there based on luck. You're not going to lose every single game because of luck. And honestly, most of the time, we focus on the rolls that did poorly for us, as opposed to the rolls that did well for us. So over the course of a game, when you're rolling hundreds of dice, the odds are usually generally going to come back to you. I always like to joke about, oh, don't underestimate my ability to roll ones. But back when I got 20,000 subscribers, I rolled my dice that I use 20,000 times between them. And I had basically the exact statistics across the board. And that's how it works. Because dice are, even if they've got the rounded corners and they've got the different weighting, there's the technicality that is like slightly more, going to come up onto this. It's so minuscule based up with however many dice you're rolling there, that the odds of your dice not giving you luck are so low that you're going to be focusing on the few times when that actual dice roll made a difference. You know, that one roll of a charge that came up with double ones. You're going to remember that one as opposed to the one where you had a little bit more 6s when you were firing off las guns into his tank, and it didn't make much of a difference in the game. But statistically and odds-wise, they're going to even out there. So yes, the luck of when the 6s come and when the 1s come might decide a game for you, but it's going to be a one game, not a whole series of games. So if you're finding yourself losing more games than winning, focus on what you can control, because luck is not something we can control. There's nothing you can do about that. And at the end of the day, that's not how you develop like winning strategies for playing games. And it's, that's why, like I said, that's the reason that the top players don't win every single game they play. They don't win every single tournament that they go into. They have that system that it kind of goes along, and you do what you need to and you can control, and it will create a consistent system where you're consistently winning and consistently putting yourself in a position to win. And that's what it comes down to. So luck can come into it every once in a while, but not consistently. So I hope that made sense to you guys. Let me know what you have, if you have any other tips and tricks to keep in mind when you're playing the game, to focus on how to win the game. And this works for any game. Like, I know a lot of the examples I was giving were very specific for Warhammer 40K, but they work for literally any game out there. Every game has its win conditions. Every game has its objectives that you need to do. And if you are not focusing on those, if you're only focusing on killing, you're not going to be winning those games. So keep in mind all of these different things that I talked about in any of the games that you're playing with. And I promise you, you will do better if you are not focusing on them currently. So let me know down below what you guys think, what you think you have, any other ideas that you have, things that are good to keep in mind to help you win, and what you've found has helped you in your pursuit of victory on the tabletop. And we'll continue that conversation. I really love having those conversations down below. A lot of people have some really good insight, and you can also help out fellow viewers. Or if you don't have any idea and you just found it cool, just let me know down below that you found it interesting, you found it helpful. I always love to hear that too. So feel free to do that. Another point to point out is that I am a member of the Army Painters Factory team. I am the resident gamer. And when I was signing up for that, I made sure to negotiate with them that I wasn't the only one benefiting from this relationship, that I could also benefit you, my fair viewers, to get some benefit from that too. So what I've worked out with them is that if you go to their website and you make any order and you put in the code FactoryGeek5, you will get yourself 5% off of any of your orders from them, and save yourself money on getting getting the paint so you can get that extra 10 points and not lose a game because you're not fully painted. So you can get yourself that extra 10 points, that solid start for a game with that 10 points with that 5% discount there. And my patrons behind the paywall there's also an additional code for different code for 10% off instead. But that has to, by the Army Painters rules, stay behind on the paywall there. But if you sign up for my Patreon and you decide to buy one of their big sets, you could easily save yourself more money by more money on the 10% save than by whatever you would put into the Patreon. And it always supports the channel. It really helps me, and I really appreciate you guys keeping these giant bright lights on my face and the cool pink ones in the back on. So, but yes, I hope you guys have all found this interesting. I certainly have. I've been Phil, the Glacial Geek, as always. And until next time, stay safe and have fun.